beginning of your handbook, you will find a Teaching for Understanding Graphic Organiser. And this brief presentation will now explore what that means. A graphic organiser is a really helpful tool because it provides you with a map, a holistic view of the whole module to come and of the key performances or key actions that the students will undertake to understand. Now, during this module, you will be introduced to the idea of teaching for understanding. And the heart of it is that it is an active learning approach whereby the students are engaged in the learning and are literally doing to understand. So this is the idea of the performance view of understanding, which we will unpack in more depth throughout the course. Now, just to start on this, you see here that I have begun with the programme learning outcomes for the postgraduate certificate, which is a Level 9 minor award. Now, by the end of this module, you should be able to do some of the following: to recognise teaching as a valid form of research and scholarship, to participate in discussions on teaching, learning and assessment as a community of scholars, to design modules based on principles of student-centred learning, to critique planning and teaching practice in the light of student learning and feedback, to engage with a diverse multicultural student population, and to hold a professional commitment to teaching and student learning. Now, it will take you some time to take these in, and indeed periodically you might return to them to see how you were getting on in terms of meeting those programme learning outcomes, which of course will also define your work in the second semester and indeed further on in the second year of the programme should you wish to stay with us. Now, the module learning outcomes for this particular module relate more specifically to some of the following: examining, for example, some theories of teaching and learning, discussing these theories, demonstrating how a chosen aspect of them works in practice, appreciating the complexities of teaching and learning, and participating in discussions, particularly the virtual ones first, about teaching and learning situations. That last one is really important, your constant presence online to be involved in the discussion boards. And ultimately then you are supporting each other in your learning and you are beginning to recognise teaching as a valid form of research and scholarship. And again, I repeat the one about holding a professional commitment to teaching and student learning, that is part of your work that you take seriously. Now, I have put those deliberately, the programme and module learning outcomes, at the beginning here above the graphic organiser to remind you, where the graphic organiser sits. Now, the generative topic that we are choosing for this course is called the tipping point, because what we are trying to get across here is the idea of turning teaching into learning. And a generative topic is one that generates great interest across the programme and that is central to the discipline. You will have several generative topics yourself, and that makes connections for your students and that is accessible to them and interesting. So my generative topic then I have chosen is as the tipping point. Now, you have again, we won't go into every detail of this, but usually in Teaching for Understanding, you begin with a big picture. What are the big questions you're asking? And these dominate throughout, let's say, not only this module, but they're the central questions that we'll be asking indeed over the 3 years of our programme online. And so I'll just ask the questions and we will have many opportunities to answer them over time. What is good teaching and how does it relate to learning? Why am I? That is, why multiple intelligences theory? Why is that worth looking at? How can I teach for understanding? How can I communicate with and engage students? And finally, how can I document, research, reflect on and communicate my teaching and student learning and build on the practice of others? So these are very key questions that will permeate all that we do in the coming year and indeed the coming 3 years. Now, so the through lines plug you into the big picture. And then in the graphic organiser, the shorter term goals, or the UGs for short, for that comes up again, they give you a focus on some more basic statements and the more key, smaller goals of the actual module. So here in statement form, these come because the bigger questions, we're constantly revisiting the questions and the reflection. But here we're making statements about what you are going to understand by the end of this module. So you will understand that teaching is related to learning, that students learn in different ways, which invites more flexible teaching methods, that good teaching is focused on what the students will do to gain understanding, not so much on what you're going to do. Assessment for understanding is about providing authentic and flexible learning opportunities for students and a variety of ongoing feedback paths. And finally, that teaching is an intellectual, reflective, critical, communal act of scholarship. Not just some dexterous act, as we have said in our introduction. It's not just about teaching, as it were, somehow with your mouth, your PowerPoint in your hands. Teaching is highly intellectual, problematizing, hypothesizing, just as any act of research. Now, coming to the heart of the graphic organiser, this is something you'll return to again and again. It's not something for just one quick glance. But you see here, for example, that I have put it in several stages across the page here in several categories. So, for example, you will see UG, which stands for the understanding goal, the module understanding goal that this section is meeting. And you will see, first of all, that the stage we're at is at introductory performances. So this is what the students will be doing in the opening, and you as students in the opening section. And then if you read across the top, so then we come to the performance, what are you going to do? And then finally to the ongoing assessment. So we will read just a selection of some of these from each stage, for there are 3 stages in teaching for understanding. So that first one, introductory performance. So your first theme in this module is teaching places, learning spaces. And that goes on in week 1 and 2. So what are you going to do performance-wise? Students will explore their teaching learning context. So you are the students in this case. And also then you will be able to go deeper with that exploration through discussion 1 about teaching places and discussion 2 learning spaces. And you will see that you'll be revisiting your own learning process and your teaching beliefs in assignment 1. And that you will have ongoing discussion online and engage with and respond to other participants. So this gives you a very good clue what you'll be doing in the first 2 weeks of this performance here. Now, just to give you an idea, under ongoing assessment, this Teaching for Understanding Graphic Organiser is a really useful tool, and takes a long time, I suppose, to plan one's teaching to this depth, but it is well worth it because, of course, you can revisit this with colleagues. I'm imagining that you're also going to do this in your own teaching. So, the criteria here, we want you to be able to identify teaching and learning signs, for example, mottos and logos and icons in your own setting, and to document, describe, share, critique and problematize these. We want you in the discussions, for example, to be able to describe, document and discuss and critique your classroom space, and to be able to reflect, identify and analyse teaching characteristics of good and bad teachers. So you see, we have highlighted the verbs so that there is a way for you really to think of how you're meeting the understanding goals and how you're meeting indeed the learning outcomes, because the learning outcomes, if you like, fall between the performance and the ongoing assessment. And then the feedback in that section, there'll be a lot of formative, informal, self and peer-to-peer feedback. And then, of course, the feedback in assignment 1 is formal in that you submit an assignment to pass, and therefore that is a formal moment. So I and the others as teacher and as facilitators, we go from formative, informal assessment for you, feedback for you from the dialogical and the diagnostic, to formal assessment reassignment 1. Now, you can study yourselves in depth this chart, and my advice to you would be to return to it again and again throughout the semester. But you see here that in theme 2 then, you're still in that introductory phase. You focus on learning how to learn in week 3, and your performance is that you participate in a TfU exercise in order to help you to begin to understand how we learn. And that the criteria here, we're identifying, your different ways of learning learning and analysing and reflecting on these. And the feedback is very much, again, formative for you in order to be able to chat to each other and to learn from each other. You see also that I have linked here at the end the learning outcomes then that we'll be meeting in terms of the module. And so we're thinking of learning outcomes 1, 2, 4, 5 and 6. So most of them are met in this opening section, and we take the chance then to reinforce that throughout. Now the second phase of the Teaching for Understanding Graphic Organiser is the guided inquiry phase, where you're going deeper. So this theme is about different folks, different strokes. In other words, people learn in different ways. And so here you see what you're going to do. Students profile their own learning strengths. So you're going to have a look at your own intelligences, and then you will explore and reflect on a series of entry points to learning in a collaborative exercise in a real or virtual gallery. Now, you will find that those of you who are involved in the orientation session, that optional one, that is one of the things we will do down in the gallery. And for everybody else who may not have the opportunity to attend, we are going to put our pictures of this and some key thoughts, of course, online for you also. So here in the guided inquiry, you're going deeper by identifying your own profile, reflecting on this, going more into yourself and how you learn, and hence the implications of that for how your students might learn. So you have to communicate and collaborate and read and analyse the signs, for example, of looking at paintings, using the entry points to learning, so that you see what it is to learn for the first time, what it is to be put in front of a work of art that you have never seen before. And we really need to take ourselves as lecturers back to that moment where we are with the students in the unknown, for we know our discipline so well that we often forget how complex it is for them to begin, for them as well to have the confidence and courage to make a statement about what they're beginning to understand. So therefore, guided inquiry phase takes you further in there. And then also another theme that comes up, of course, at this point is the idea of acidere, sitting beside the student, the Latin for the word assessment. And so here again, you're going deeper, and you'll be taking in your second assignment a CAT, that is, a classroom assessment technique. And again, that is part of your performance of understanding. So again, the feedback will go from the informal to the formal when you take the exercise, the CAT exercise, and this is marked for pass, as it were, in the light of your interpretation of how your own students are learning. And then finally we come to the culminatory phase of the graphic organiser. That is to say, the culmination of the final performance. And this, of course, is all about the reflective stance, bringing it all back home, as we say, and this is a little bit of a pun on Sherlock Holmes, H-O-L-M-E, but we've put it literally as bringing it all back home, H-O-M-E, the case for the reflective practitioner. And here, one of the things that you will do is to think about the readings you've done and respond to those over the course of the term. And also, Dan Blackshields is going to take you through a reflective exercise. So again, you see there's much doing and engagement on your part. It is what you do to understand that's important. And the key thing as a lecturer, when you are learning, for example, to model this yourself and to use it, perhaps in designing with some colleagues your own teaching, is that you put the focus on what they're going to do and how you know they're going to understand. So that's what the ongoing assessment is all about, the criteria that you will use to reflect on and critique their preconceptions, and in this case your own. Also, the students appreciating and, committed to reflection. So reflection, is not easy. It doesn't come naturally to us. We have to learn to stand back and to problematize and to think things through. So the idea here on this all the way down through the ongoing assessment, you see we keep mentioning two things, the criteria. In other words, what's going to count? What matters? How do we know that our students know and understand? And then the feedback to those students, which has many levels. It can be formative and informal, or it can be summative and formal. And we use naturally in good assessment, one would use them all. And of course, the other part of assessment is that there's much self-assessment. You assessing yourself. For example, in each of the rubrics you present to us when you complete your assignment, you also self-assess first to tell us where you think you are, and that will show us as well that you have taken the assignment seriously. And again, you might model that for your own students and use the same with them. So that ultimately then you find that the feedback is very much part of the teaching. And as I say, the interesting thing in terms of learning outcomes in the Bologna process, which we will come to in detail in the second module, is that these learning outcomes really fall between performance and ongoing assessment. What the learning outcome is all about, what you do to understand. So the Teaching for Understanding Graphic Organiser picks that up because all of the performances are named and the criteria whereby we know they have been achieved are named. So we have managed really to embed learning outcomes as well. And that is why at the end of each section, you see that I have named them, the 8 of them here practically at the end, again, all of them achieved. Now, finally on this, the skills strands in the Teaching for Understanding Graphic Organiser. We are taking, for example, the major focus is research, that you are going to learn to research your teaching. And then what is supported is your reflection. It is supported online through the discussions. It is supported in the way in which you're asked to self-assess, and it is supported in the way in which we present the module to you. And finally, it is required that you are able to discuss. This is a very useful aspect of the TfU Graphic Organiser because, for example, we take for granted that you can discuss. This may be problematic later if that doesn't turn out to be the case, and so that is a very interesting point of research for us. So TfU was very good at making explicit what one is actually doing. Finally, you see that in the understanding goals here, I have a cross-check for them. The long-term through-line goals, these are embedded in the discussions in the assignments, and the short-term goals are itemised above in 1 to 5 all the way down and are in the different phases of inquiry, of which, as I say again, there are 3, the introductory phase, the guided inquiry, and finally the culminatory phase. And lastly, the learning outcomes cross-check. We have also tried to take care of those. So, in short, the Teaching for Understanding Graphic Organiser is indeed a scholarship of teaching and learning tool because it makes explicit and puts upfront what it is you are going to understand in this. And it is a very quick way, much quicker to read indeed than to talk through, a very quick way of showing your colleagues as well your whole unit for a whole module. So it's very shareable, can be built on by others, the actual hallmark of research, the idea that it can be shared on and can be changed. So the Teaching for Understanding Graphic Organiser then, very much your map for this module. You can return to this again and again, and in the future, perhaps when you have a better understanding of it, it is indeed a very useful way to plan a module that you too are designing. So I wish you luck and joy in proceeding through this module, and we look forward to working with you on it.